Nancy. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm looking forward to exchanging ideas and thoughts here. So please, let's keep this informal, and if you have questions as we're going along, do jump in. You're probably all familiar with the billion-ton study, also called the 30-30 study. It was a group of people from the Department of Energy and the Department of Agriculture. Got together in 2004 and met with the idea of creating, determining whether or not the U.S. could displace 30% of its liquid transportation fuels with renewable sources by the year 2030, and that's they felt it would take about 1 billion tons of dry biomass to make that goal. As I mentioned, it's also called the 30-30 study because the initial goal was to do 30% of the biomass, or displace 30% of the transportation fuel by the year 2030. So the 30-30 aspect of it. And in the report published in 2005, they determined that we do have the land resources in the United States to actually go beyond 1 billion tons. They felt that that the U.S. with proper management could produce 1.3 billion tons annually of dry biomass, and that would include forest resources. It would include agricultural resources, including corn grain, including cellulosic ethanol or biomass feedstocks, including some energy coming out of animal feed yards, some human energy sources to make that 1.3 billion tons, and that would be without damaging our food and feed and export demands. So that's gone on. I think it was in the 2006 State of the Union address that President Bush mentioned switchgrass as one of the crops in one of the areas, as he was talking about changes in the nation. The switchgrass would be one thing that we could be growing in this country to, in fact, help to make this 1 billion tons of biomass that the government desired. So, since 2002, I've been working with a group of scientists in the College of Agriculture and the College of Plant, or in the Department of Plant, also in the Department of Plant Biology, looking at issues related to cellulosic ethanol, or the agronomics related to producing the feedstocks to create cellulosic ethanol. And the areas that I work in currently in this is looking at feedstocks, what feedstocks are the best for a given area. So we're pretty much starting from scratch in this. We don't know, for example, where a lot of these grasses or other plants will be best grown. So we're trying to identify the best species for given areas. We're also, in some cases, such as switchgrass, where there's many varieties, we're trying to identify the best varieties for a given area. We're also looking at the agronomy, or the agronomics of these feedstocks. So in the case of some of these feedstocks, it's pretty straightforward. If you're growing sorghum, it's very similar to growing corn or maize. That's pretty straightforward. But on a number of these other crops, such as Miscanthus giganteus, which I'll spend a considerable amount of time talking about, that's a sterile plant, and so we deal with asexual propagation methods. And I come out of, as Nancy mentioned in my introduction, I came out of the ornamental horticulture area. Growing a single 5-gallon pot of Miscanthus giganteus in somebody's yard is entirely different than planting 500 acres of Miscanthus and having it survive and grow to be productive. So that's a much different aspect of this. And so we're looking at all of the other areas of agronomics. As you might anticipate, fertilization, water management, pest controls, eradication at the time we want to get out of these crops. So those are all things that we're studying. And then we have people through the Energy Biosciences Institute in our Department of Agricultural Engineering. looking at a variety of issues related to handling the feedstock once it's been produced. And that would include the harvesting of the feedstock itself, the moving of the feedstock, storage of the feedstock. There's a great amount of work going on in that, because this will be, if this takes place, it will be a major change in the current economics and culture of agronomic areas. This is an old map, and certainly some of it's accurate and some of it's inaccurate, but this was done in 2000, and it shows different crops and where they might in fact be grown. I think that again, some of it's accurate, some of it's a little inaccurate. For example, I don't think we're going to see, in my opinion, we're not going to see Miscanthus giganteus grown into that far up in that red area up into Minnesota and Wisconsin. I think it'll be more likely grown further south. However, there are some other species of Miscanthus that may end up there. Overall, I think the southeastern United States is going to be a strong area for growing biomass feedstocks for a variety of reasons. The growing season is of a good length down there. Winters are more mild than they are as you get further north. There's in many of those areas there's adequate rainfall on an annual basis to produce the biomass. I think from an agronomic point of view, there's a lot more pastures grown there than there might be in other areas of the Midwest or Great Plains where row crop agriculture is more common. And so where we're dealing with annual crops primarily here, those farmers are more accustomed to dealing with perennial cropping systems, which we think will take place. Land needs some erosion control more so than it does here, and so perennial cropping systems work nicely in those areas. So overall, I think the southeastern U.S. is going to be well suited to a lot of these crops. And I would expand my vision of the southeast into southern Illinois, across into eastern Kansas, and then go across to the Atlantic Ocean and perhaps jut up a little bit north. From there, we have some plots in New Jersey that are quite productive, or look like they'll be quite productive in the future. So what are we looking for as we determine the species or varieties and where they should be grown? So we certainly prefer perennial crops, although we are looking at sorghum as a transitional crop, but we prefer perennial and persistent. There may be a large upfront cost, but the long-term yields can be quite good in the number of trips over the field, the energy expended on an annual basis to harvest or to plant, put down pest controls, fertilize, harvest can be reduced with perennial cropping systems, plus the added advantage of a carbon capturing and holding underground portion of the plant is desirable. We'd love native crops, and we are looking at a number of them, as you'll hear in a moment. But we're also examining exotic species as well. We want high biomass yield potential. If you can reduce the number of acres required for biomass crops, then those acres are available for other cropping or production systems. We'd like it to be easy to propagate, and that's not necessarily the case with all of the plant materials that we're looking at. We'd like to have them be very use efficient in the case of water and fertilizers. We'd like to have plant those plants that are less demanding than ones that are more demanding. We'd like to have the ability to do genetic work with these plants so that we can create and work on varieties that'll best be suited to different growing conditions, pest conditions, that type of thing. And in a perfect world, we'd be able to handle these with what exists now as agricultural equipment. We would not be looking at creating a lot of different types of handling equipment for these crops. What we're doing here in the group that I work with is we're looking at these different species or these different plants. We're just starting to work with energy cane, miscane, and aricane. I hope. I'm going to Louisiana tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be creating some collaborative activities with the Department of Agriculture down there. Again, where we can do plot work with these plants. We're looking at corn in our energy farm in the South Farms, sorghum, switchgrass, and a number of other tall grass prairie species, and then certainly Miscanthus. These are the feedstocks that we currently are studying. Depending on the feedstock, we have different amounts of research activities going on with them. I must say that a lot of the work that I do is through the Energy Biosciences Institute. That is the project the U of I, the University of California at Berkeley, and Lawrence Berkeley Labs. We are actually a subcontractor to University of California at Berkeley. And through this project, we've received a large grant from British Petroleum to work on renewable energy sources. So a lot of this is being conducted there, but I'm also working with the Department of Energy on a study where we have Miscanthus giganteus at 4 sites in the U.S., and also working with Mendel and Ceres, 2 biotech firms that are actively involved in growing energy feedstocks. Through the EBI this year, for example, we planted plots in 9 states outside of Illinois where we're comparing Miscanthus to switchgrass, and they range from South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Michigan in the northern part of the U.S. down to Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, in the southern U.S., and Kentucky, New Jersey, Oklahoma. So we've got a variety of sites that we're trying to, again, as I mentioned up front, identify what's the best plant to grow where. Where can we successfully grow the crops that we're interested in? The first picture here, this is energy cane. Energy cane is a cross between traditional sugar cane and another Saccharum species that's native to the base of the Himalayas. So what we have here is a grass that has more cold tolerance than sugar cane. The people down at the Sugarcane Research Center in Houma, Louisiana, some of them think it can go as far north as into Arkansas. Certainly, there's at least one of the varieties. They have several different varieties of this that is being grown in northern Mississippi, and it survived the winters that far north, which takes it considerably north of where you would typically grow sugarcane, which would be in the south part of Florida, South Texas, southern Louisiana. Primarily, here we're looking at fiber or cellulosic harvest here. We're not looking at sugar harvest as we would from sugarcane. We're here looking at biomass production with this crop. I mentioned miscane and aricane, and breeders in the south have crossed Miscanthus sinensis with sugarcane and an Erianthus species with sugarcane, and again, with hopes of expanding the northernmost boundaries where you can grow these crops by adding some cold tolerance from these other species. So those are plants that, again, I hope that we'll be able to collaborate with the USDA on and creating growing sites in the south. We are growing maize. As I mentioned the energy farm through the Energy Biosciences Institute. We're developing a 320-acre energy farm in the South Farms, and in 2008 we planted about 16 acres each of corn, Miscanthus giganteus, switchgrass, and tall grass prairie, where we are able to capture a great deal of data beyond yield data. We're monitoring the soil conditions pre-planting, throughout the planting. We're looking at gases coming out of the soil. We're looking at gas movements within the cropping systems. We're looking at pests that are occurring within those blocks. And what we have there within that 16 acres, we have about a 9-acre large planting of each of those crops, and then about 1.6-acre blocks of each one of those crops that we, in fact, are looking for, again, at yields and other environmental aspects of their production. And maize is part of that because it is so commonly planted in this part of the country, and it's a great comparison to the other crops we're working with.
Is it the cellulose too?
No, this would be for grain yields directly. We're not doing anything at this point with the stover. But again, we're hoping to be able to compare the yield, the ethanol yield from the grain, and actually. We're debating now. We've had 2 years of corn, and we think we probably need to go to a year of soybeans and then rotate back into a couple of years of corn again on those crops, because we're trying to emulate a typical agricultural system here that a farmer would employ. There are no potatoes to this point. Okay, you did ask about potatoes, right? Yeah. Okay, no potatoes to this point. Energy sorghum, there are a number of different types of sorghum, and I'm just starting to learn about them. As I mentioned earlier, we're really interested in perennial crops and cropping systems. However, we see sorghum as a great intermediate crop, and there are a number of different types. There's grain sorghum, and there's forage sorghums, and the energy sorghums are ones that generally won't flower here. They'll continue to grow large amounts of biomass, more so than most of our other crops. They are much more, because it's an annual crop, you're going over the field more times a year, but the yields are quite substantial. Where we see them fitting into what we're doing is as a transition for farmers moving from annual crops into perennial cropping systems. We see them as an emergency crop that we could plant if we need a big influx in a hurry of biomass crops, because a lot of the perennial crops take a much longer period of time to achieve maximum yields. And frankly, we see that this will be more attractive to some of our bankers, because the bankers are used to dealing with annual crops. Loan the money, get the money back on a more timely basis. If we're talking about 2 years for a good switchgrass harvest or 3 years for a miscanthus harvest, that's outside of what I think our typical agricultural lenders might be accustomed to dealing with. Then we have our tallgrass prairie species, and we're dealing with a number of different types of these. Switchgrass is one, as I mentioned, President Bush mentioned, I believe it was in his 2006 State of the Union address. Switchgrass is a native plant, and it's attractive because the USDA has continued to work on this for a great many years. They've been involved in making improved selections of this crop, and it's used as a forage crop, and that's why the USDA has been involved with this all along. We're growing Cave and Rock, which was selected out of southern Illinois. Here, that's an upland type. The upland types tend to be more cold tolerant, tend to yield less than the lowland types. And there are some new types. We planted these two new blade types out of series. We planted 5 acres of each of those. They are lowland types and tend to will be much more productive than the upland types will be. We anticipate, or we hope. So we're looking to move into these crops. Here we're having good success growing these. And why switchgrass? Well, again, the USDA has been studying it and breeding it and working with it for many, many years. But it is a native. It grows, I think, in 46 of the lower 48 states. So it's native it has a wide native range. There's a lot of genetic variation within the crop, which is good for selection and improvement. It's not as easy if we gave 50 pounds of switchgrass seed to a local farmer. They would be much more comfortable with that than they would with planting rhizomes of miscanthus. However, it is in fact not quite as easy to plant have success with as corn or soybeans. A few differences, but it certainly is something more familiar to a farmer. It is a long-lived sod producer, and then it has the great aspects of other perennial grasses. The state grass of Illinois is big bluestem, and we're looking at that. There actually is a person in there, so it gets to be quite, and that is an adult. It is in fact a reasonable producer. Just starting to look at this. There's been some work done out of the University of Nebraska and the USDA there, and they've had some decent success with big bluestem and combined with Indian grass and some other native species. So this will be, again, something that we've got plantings out, although too early to start harvest or have established yields. Prairie cordgrass is one that we just started this past year working with. Prairie cordgrass is a Spartina pectinata. It is a extremely tough native prairie species. It's got very good tolerance to wet areas, and it's got some tolerance to salt, to soils with sodium problems. And so we see this as perhaps a grass that we can grow in areas that are unsuited to other crops. There are some species within the genus that will actually grow in brackish waters on the East Coast and in the Southeast. So Spartina is, as a group, is capable of growing in some pretty difficult locations. Downside here is that it's difficult to grow from seed. It also is oftentimes planted by rhizomes and planted that way. But seeds are not quite a sure bet as they might be with something like switchgrass. We are looking at mixes of those, as I mentioned, through the University of Nebraska. One of our faculty, D.K. Lee, is collaborating with them on looking at mixes, and they've tended to have some pretty decent success looking at mixes of these different native grasses and taking a kind of a shotgun approach, looking at planting a variety of species and hoping that something will do well in different areas is working. They're still having a very low diversity system. And the seed for all of these is relatively available and relatively affordable. Some of the native plantings are certainly much more expensive than the seeds that you would find from these plants. As I mentioned, we planted a tall grass prairie, 16 acres of that in 2008. This was based on the work out of Minnesota by Tillman, where he found that he reported that the more diversity you had in a prairie planting, the potentially more energy you could produce, compared to using a monoculture. I'm not so sure that that's an accurate assessment, but we're testing that. We planted a tall grass prairie from seed, and we have about 25 to 27 species. We've identified, I think, all but a couple of species in the second growing season, so not sure that they all came through. But mostly we have a couple of warm season grass species, such as big bluestem and Indian grass, and little bluestem, some nitrogen fixers, and then a variety of forbs. And this would rival planting an acre of tall grass prairie would rival planting an acre of miscanthus. The cost is pretty substantial here, more than $1,000 an acre for the seed. One of the things that we've noticed, as you would certainly imagine to be true, is that in this the second full year from planting, the animal or the bird diversity was tremendous over the prairie compared to our other cropping systems. I've seen pheasants out there and a variety of other avian species, which obviously means there's more insects out there, there's better habitat. We rarely see anywhere near the diversity over corn or miscanthus, and even over switchgrass in the monocultures as we see here. So this, while it's expensive, there may be that added wildlife benefit to planting the tall grass prairie. Now I want to get into talking about the plant that we've spent the majority of our time studying. As I mentioned, I've been working with this as an ornamental since the late 1980s. We've got a clump on campus that we planted as an ornamental demonstration planting, and it was planted in 1988 or 89. It's still very productive. It still is quite large. If we look at miscanthus, there are, depending on what taxonomist you read, there could be as many as 24, 25 species worldwide. The most current take on it, based on some genetics that indicates there's 11 to 12 species worldwide. The plants that we're most interested in here in the Midwest are Miscanthus sinensis, Miscanthus sacriflorus, and Miscanthus giganteus. When I talk about the 20-year-old clump, I'm talking about Miscanthus giganteus. We have a clump that was planted, as I said, in 88 or 89, and it's still doing very well. It's still very productive. Miscanthus sinensis is the commonly planted ornamental. It's called silvergrass or eualia. It is, if you've planted zebra grass or porcupine grass or maiden grass or morning light, there's probably 50 or more different varieties of Miscanthus sinensis that are for sale in ornamental plant nurseries. Miscanthus sacriflorus is also planted a little bit as an ornamental. It's called silver banner grass. If you see this, a clump of miscanthus, and it seems to be forming a clump as opposed to individual types. And right now you'll see it with a very nice rust red foliage and a very white seed head in that clump. That would be Miscanthus sacriflorus. And then, as I mentioned, Miscanthus giganteus is the plant we're most interested in. It is a hybrid of Miscanthus sinensis and Miscanthus sacriflorus, and it would be the best yielder so far within this group. These are all Asian natives. Miscanthus sinensis, as you can see, has got the larger range. When I lost my blue line on the sacriflorus, would be in that upper region. The red area would be, or the sacriflorus would be in that blue, would be native in that blue area. The sinensis in the red area. And Miscanthus giganteus, as I mentioned, is a sterile hybrid of these two species. It was first identified by a Danish nurseryman in Yokohama, Japan in 1935. It was taken from Japan to Europe, where it was produced as a landscape ornamental. It spread throughout Europe. It spread into the U.S. as a landscape ornamental. And then starting in, probably in the early 1980s, there was the Danes started to do research on Miscanthus giganteus as a biomass crop, and in Europe they do use it as a biomass crop, but they burn it for heat and electricity production. We here started out, our research here started with that intent, and we are now looking at more of the ethanol production aspects of it. All of these are C4 or warm season grasses. And again, they're all native to East Asia. This is Miscanthus sacriflorus. A little before the foliage turns that rusty red color, but you can see the very vivid white seed heads on this plant. By the way, if you're, I saw some clumps of it growing along the Edens Expressway, probably around Peterson. On the east or on the west side of the highway, it will escape and become invasive. And I saw that just a couple weeks ago when I was up there. It does move around through a variety of areas. I saw it in eastern Nebraska a couple weeks ago when I was there looking at some of our plots, and so that's a concern that I have about it. This is a very it spreads by both seed and rhizomes. And so this is, I think, where the Miscanthus giganteus gets its rhizomatous growth habit. And then Miscanthus sinensis, as I mentioned, is the widely planted species that's used in landscape plantings. This is outside of the trial garden on Lincoln Avenue. Miscanthus sinensis Adagio is one of the good small Miscanthus types. Worry about it also as a invasive species. It can also spread here by seed. Sacriflorus can spread by seed and by rhizomes, as mentioned. Again, the plant that we're interested in is Miscanthus giganteus. It's the sterile hybrid of those two species. This is Lisa Ainsworth, a professor here at the university. We do select short women to stand in front of the, or short men, but we find shorter women typically. We're trying to make the plant look. Trying to make the plant look bigger, as big as we can here. So Lisa is full grown, and this would be prior to flowering, probably in sometime in early September. Probably not soon. We have to get some taller grasses. Energy cane. and again, we see this as being quite productive. Here we have Miscanthus sinensis on your left, crossing with Sacroflorus, and we're forming a sterile triploid, the Giganteus. Now, the Giganteus that we're growing was of natural origin. There's some debate on how many times it has occurred in nature. There are some people that say they have multiple types of plants sold as Giganteus that occurred naturally. A company out of Germany, it used to be East Germany, Tin Plant, actually did many crosses, and this is you're the first group on campus that's seen this slide. I was in Kentucky earlier in October, and through Mendel bought the company that created the cross of Miscanthus sinensis and Sacroflorus, and what they're looking at is this variety that they've named Nagara. Again, this is southwest of Bowling Green, Kentucky, in a 25-acre Miscanthus planting. Nagara, from what I've been told, is sterile, and again, the goal for having different genetics available would be for pest reasons, for environmental tolerances, that type of thing. Having some genetic diversity is a good thing. So this is Nagara Miscanthus. You probably, or you may see more of this down the road, but again, this is a cross between sinensis and Sacroflorus. As I mentioned, I have concerns about both sinensis and Sacroflorus as invasive plants. Miscanthus sinensis, this is an area at our research center where I've grown a lot of different Miscanthus sinensis types, and these clumps here are all, they occurred naturally. We had some seedlings of Miscanthus sinensis growing in the gutter on our building. So I do have some concerns about its ability to spread. I don't worry about it becoming a farm pest, an agronomic pest, and I don't worry about it moving into somebody's urban yard, but where we have to be concerned is it moving into natural areas where there's less competition for it. So that is a concern I have. And there are companies that are looking at Miscanthus sinensis as a potential biomass crop. So they're taking steps to reduce the potential for invasiveness, but that's still a concern I have. Miscanthus sacroflorus, again, it is invasive, and this one spreads both by seed and it'll spread by rhizomes. This is a picture I took in September in eastern Nebraska. It was just there was a couple of different areas where it was growing in the roadside ditch near that. And as I mentioned, I saw it a couple of weeks ago up in the Edens Expressway. So I don't know that anybody's looking at Sacroflorus by itself as a biomass crop, but it does in fact have the ability to move, and so that is a concern. So Giganteus is what, as I mentioned, what we're looking at, and from pretty much this point on, if I say Miscanthus, I'm talking about Miscanthus giganteus. Miscanthus giganteus is a rhizomatous warm season grass. It's sterile. We have not seen any evidence of any fertile seed production, or I've never seen Miscanthus growing anywhere where we didn't plant it. It gets to be approximately 4 meters tall. It's got very good cold tolerance once it's established. I think it needs to be grown where it gets in temperate areas where it has cold weather, and the plant goes dormant for several months, because we harvest it during the winter period when it is dormant. It has low inputs. It has not responded to nitrogen in most of our plantings. There's I believe a 10-year-old planting in Rothamsted, England, where it also was not responding to nitrogen applications. I don't think that's going to be entirely accurate throughout the whole range where we might grow it, but still, that's what we've seen to this point. Well, we have postdocs in the EBI that have found pests on the plant but we don't have any idea if any of them will become commercial pests, only because we have such small amounts of it planted. And having a couple acres here and a couple acres there is going to be, we're going to be less inclined to have a pest problem than if we had 500 acres growing in there. And by the way, our postdocs are also looking at the potential for corn or soybean pests, for example, to move into to use Miscanthus as a site for overwintering or whatever. One of the great things about the grass is, even though it's a warm season grass, it photosynthesizes at very low temperatures. This grass is typically about 2 meters tall by the end of May. And for a warm season grass, if you're familiar with any of the native species, for a warm season grass, this is a great attribute. It outgrows any weed competition that might exist, number one. Number two, it's able to take advantage of the wet soils in the spring. Take advantage of the spring rains, take advantage of snow melt, take advantage of that area. So when we think that if there's a droughty period, which here we would typically have later in the growing season, it's already up to some size and able to still have a reasonable yield with that period. Now, as I said, it's sterile, and we plant it by rhizomes typically. Here's a rhizome lifter or harvester, and we've modified this from another cropping system to pull the rhizomes out of the ground. There's still a lot of hand labor to separate them and clean them up, but we've started out digging them by hand. So we've gone from Stone Age technology into at least into the last 20-year kind of technology. That's the planting, the material that we're planting. Those are some cleaned, harvested rhizomes of Miscanthus. Jack Widholm in Crop Sciences has produced tissue culture plants, as people at other universities and people in Europe have done. We look at this as a method of rapid propagation. The downside is to this, and what they found in Europe was that the propagation method was much more expensive than rhizome propagation, and it was also there's more of an issue with first winter cold tolerance than there was with rhizome planted plants. Here is what we've been using to plant. We can do about an acre an hour with this modified planter. We take rhizomes up to 50 grams. Plant them about 10 centimeters deep, about 4 inches deep, and we plant them at the rate of at least 1 per square meter. We'd like to go more into which is about 4,200 rhizomes an acre. We'd like to increase that up to about 7,000 rhizomes per acre, which is about a 30-inch or 72-centimeter spacing, both within and between the rows. We're collaborating with some people on mechanical planters. This is an early incarnation of one of the mechanical planters that we've worked with them on, and this one we can do about 30 to 40 acres a day. So we are moving into commercial scale. Our latest incarnation did probably about an 85% accurate planting in our last one. You can imagine that it's difficult to have a machine that we're planting such irregular propagules. The rhizomes can be T-shaped, X-shaped, straight, crooked, Y-shaped, as small as probably 20 grams up to maybe 40 grams in weight. So there's a huge variation within those, and developing a machine that can do that is something that has taken a little while to do. First winter death is a concern. This is a first winter planting towards the end of the first growing season, and when we've had problems with cold tolerance, it's not been in mature crop plantings, but it's been in the first winter. And we think there's a variety of reasons. There's not a lot of rhizome mass to get through, that if it's damaged, it's not deep and it's more prone to damage. Perhaps the soil stays warm longer because there's no leaf litter, there's no shade on it, which keeps it growing longer into the fall, which makes it more succulent when temperatures drop, that type of thing. If you look at this as a planting that was done by Emily Heaton in 2002, you can see that this was planted in May of 2002 from plants. By August of 2003, in the second growing season, we're starting to get a close canopy. You can still see the spacing between the plants. And the same planting in 2004, which would be at the end of the third growing season, we're starting to get good our plateau yields with that. And then this planting would be harvested in during the winter. We harvest it when it's dormant, anywhere from mid-December through the end of March. Yes, well, not me personally. Emily did that as part of her PhD work, and there was one of the things that this plant tends to do as it gets cold. We start getting hard frosts in the fall. Mineral nutrients are shipped out of the above ground parts of the plants into the rhizome mass below ground, number one. Number two, it starts to drop leaves, which again recycles those nutrients. We don't typically, when we harvest it, there's not a lot of leaves on the stems themselves. So it's being recycled. The mineral nutrients are being, many of them are being recycled here.
Is the first crop, is after 3 years?
We can get probably a half of a crop in the second year. Third year, we start to get on good soils as we have here. We start to get plateau yields.
And every year
We think 15 years is not anywhere, wouldn't be unusual at all.
So every year after that?
Yeah, from that one planting.
Right at the bottom?
We harvested. You can see there's some stubble there. We'll try to get down to 2 to 4 inch stubble height. We've been using traditional cutting and baling equipment, although we've worked with the Department of Energy through their Idaho National Labs collaborators, and we've looked at a number of different planters through them that have been specifically designed for handling biomass crops. Stored bales of miscanthus, and these are miscanthus and switchgrass, but this was at the old beef science facility, and we had 3-year-old bales that were very intact, didn't seem to have any rodent damage, didn't deteriorate much. So if they're kept dry, they seem to be quite stable. Stems look a lot like bamboo, although they're solid. There's a pith in there that they're not hollow like you might find in bamboo. They're probably 3/8 of an inch to, well, 1/4 inch to 1/2 an inch in diameter. We've done a lot of work with weed control. Most of the herbicides that can be applied to in corn production, both pre-emergence for annual grass and post-emergence for broadleaf weeds, we've looked at, and for the most part, miscanthus is pretty tolerant to that suite of herbicides. We've also looked at eradication on miscanthus because no good farmer will plant something that they don't think that they can kill. I had a student, we went into a miscanthus field in November of 2007 and harvested rhizomes from that field, but you will never get all of the rhizomes out of the field. In spring of 2008, we went into that field with Roundup-tolerant soybeans. We planted the soybeans here, and you looked at hand weeding, total hand weeding, other than the miscanthus, and a couple of different Roundup applications. These would be 2 applications of Roundup. That was last fall. And the yields on those were not unlike what we would get in surrounding soybean fields. We came into that same field in 2009 and planted, again, Roundup-tolerant corn. And you can see that we have a few areas where the miscanthus has, in fact, survived, but that's where there was no herbicide, no glyphosate or Roundup put on those plantings during either year, 2008 or 2009. Where we used the 2 applications of Roundup, which was within the labeled application rates, we had pretty clean fields there. We've also looked at combinations of tillage and glyphosate in the spring and fall. Unfortunately, our plantings we don't have a lot of plantings of this that we were willing to kill, and our plots were quite small. We were unable to take really heavy-duty tillage equipment in, and we damaged it a great deal with these practices, but we didn't totally eradicate it. And we think that's as a result of the rhizomes from quite deep in the soil. It'll get down to 10 inches. The rhizome mat will get down to 10 inches or so, and we were probably tilling no deeper than 6 or 7 inches deep. So we did have regrowth with that. So in closing, I have got some of my final thoughts. You know, from what I've talked about with the plants we're looking at and the different things with the cold weather damage to first-year plantings of miscanthus, I think the southeastern United States, and again, I would bring that up into southern Illinois, but I think that part of the U.S. is going to be big biomass production area. We probably would see switchgrass and other native plants grown in the northern Midwest and northern Great Plains as well. I think herbaceous perennials are what we're looking for. However, sorghum and perhaps other annuals will fit into that in time. We still are a long way away from having a feedstock economy. We have a lot to learn about the plants and the agronomics connected to those plants, as well as the infrastructure required to get the plants or the biomass from the field to a plant, as well as having plants that do a successful job in creating ethanol from that biomass. And I think, my opinion is that for this to really take off, the government is going to have to provide penalties or subsidies to encourage the development. I don't know if it's going to come out of the marketplace on its own without the government intervention at some point. A couple last slides here. This is plantings that Emily Heaton put in 2002. We have miscanthus and switchgrass. This is cave and rock switchgrass. This is our Miscanthus giganteus, and this was planted at she planted at 3 sites in Illinois. Frank Dolman expanded that to 4 more sites in Illinois, and Becky Arundale expanded that to 9 sites outside of Illinois. So we've got 16 sites where we're growing these side-by-side plots to look at yield comparisons between miscanthus and switchgrass, as well as look at the cold tolerance of miscanthus. We are within these Illinois, all of the switchgrass is cave and rock. In all the plots outside of Illinois, we allowed the collaborators at each site to select the switchgrass variety that they felt would be the most successful yield-wise and survival-wise there. Going to Emily's first plantings, DeKalb, Urbana, and Dixon Springs, and the tons per hectare are always substantially better with miscanthus than they than they have been with switchgrass. We're continuing on with this study, by the way, so we'll be collecting more data as time goes on. But you can see that during a winter harvest, the miscanthus has done considerably better than the switchgrass. I think because Emily was here. I think the graduate student was able to care better, do a better job of managing the crops here. We had to rely on site personnel for a lot of the management in northern and southern Illinois, as well as now the other 4 sites in Illinois and the sites we have outside. And some of them are going to do a better job than others. They're going to care more about it than others. So Emily was more hands-on with the. Pardon me? If weeds are a problem initially, then that could really have a major impact. Weeds early on will really damage the long-term production of the fields. So with that, I've expended most of my time. I apologize for going long. I'll be happy to hang around and answer any questions, and I appreciate your time and attention. So thank you very much. Hans? The question was about. I don't really want to repeat it because I don't know an answer. What about tropical maize or sugar corn? I'm not familiar enough with those crops to be able to speak with any intelligence about them. So. I know from what I've read in the paper and some articles that they have great potential, but that's as much as I know. So, yes. Still no potatoes.
Yeah, I'm curious about potatoes. Yeah. I mean, that is very super energy. I mean, in terms of a food crop, it's the most productive, and Northern Europe wouldn't be populated the way it is today if it weren't for potatoes. So does that not translate over into, wouldn't translate over into burning, but it would translate into ethanol, wouldn't it?
Again, you're outside of my realm of expertise with the chemistry involved in making the conversion. So I would expect that it would have potential, but I don't know. Again, we're looking at an annual crop and perhaps more inputs than we're looking at with these perennial grasses. Yes.
Eric Rudd, I assume you know him.
Sure.
He's been trying to do some work on 15K and other units. When do you harvest? Do you harvest at the beginning of the harvest season or throughout that time? Is anybody eating already done that much of that work? Or?
I think anything that's been, I think everything that's been done is it's on such a limited scale that any, you'll see a lot of models, you'll see a lot of information about this, but it's still in its infancy, and there's not a lot of data points making up those models and making there's the opportunity. We have a long way to go, as I mentioned, to fine tune the data that we have. Miscanthus giganteus, for example, some of the models will show it could grow up to Hudson Bay. And so again, a plant in your yard may grow in a protected site up at south of Hudson Bay. But I wouldn't want to be the farmer that would spend a huge amount of money planting an acre of that and have much of it die. It's a big difference between a landscape plant in a 2 or 5 gallon bucket that you can grow versus a 1 ounce rhizome that you expect to sprout and survive that first winter. It's a big difference. Certainly learn a lot about that. Don?
Some non-native plants have had a lot of trouble with extreme weather events. Like there's trees that will grow well in somebody's yard for 10, 15 years, and then they get zapped by either prolonged freeze or moisture conditions. Is there much known about miscanthus and some of the western switchgrasses that might be used here in relation to that issue?
Question was related to miscanthus and switchgrass tolerance to extreme weather conditions. Well, certainly switchgrass is native here, has grown in the Midwest and the Great Plains for thousands of years. So there certainly are types that are pretty much tolerant of any weather. I would expect we've experienced pretty much any weather conditions that we may experience in the future. So I think we're okay there. Miscanthus-wise, again, we've had it here for 20 years. Our original plantings came out of the Chicago Botanic Garden, and they still exist there. In that time, we've had a few summer droughts. We've had, again, in our very limited ornamental demonstration, it's gone to 20 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit air temperatures and survived that. So I think it's a pretty rugged plant. Will it take 30 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit? I don't know. I don't know that it's been grown in areas where it's experienced that. I've been out in December when we've had ice storms, and it'll look like the plant stems will look like a bamboo fishing pole with a large fish on the end of it. But as soon as it thaws out, they become erect. Switchgrass, on the other hand, may not do that. When it gets matted down, it's not as likely to bounce back up, which makes harvesting a little more difficult in that case. So miscanthus, a friend from Mississippi sent me images after Katrina, and the miscanthus came back up after it was blown down during the hurricane season. The switchgrass was matted down and didn't come back up. Yes.
Do you know about how much bioethanol you can get from a ton of miscanthus biomass?
How much bioethanol can we get per ton? I think I've seen figures like at 84 gallons per ton, but I think the scientists will tell you that we're very close or at 100. In some cases up to 100 gallons per ton. And if we're looking at, and that's a U.S. ton. So if we're looking at 10 to 12 tons of miscanthus per acre, we're probably in the 800 to more than 1,000 gallons per acre of ethanol. Does that jive with your thinking about that? Yeah.
Just sort of an observation for those people that are, espousing kind of these mixed plantings. I guess I have concerns about how you go about deconstructing them. That really could have a challenge. You have any thoughts along those lines?
Again, that's outside the realm of how to deconstruct a mixed planting. That's outside of my realm of expertise. But when I first saw the Tillman paper, that was one of the questions that I thought too. Is that I don't know enough about the chemistry to know if they all deconstruct similarly, or if in fact there would have to be different methods to optimize that, the deconstruction of the different species. Certainly, when you've got forbs and grasses mixed together, I could see some compositional differences within those plants.